Good evening. We have a British voice for the other half of Shad's life. I'm beyond delighted to be here with you all today in the city of Philos Adelphos of brotherly love. And I was even more delighted when yesterday I was asked, could I write a 10-minute introduction to be the stand-in for Shad's plenary. Of course, I absolutely jumped at the chance. And in this conference where we've come together as criminologists to think about what it means to seek justice, to reconcile with our past, and to reimagine the future, I thought this process surely must involve admitting times when we've got it wrong. So I'm going to start with one of those. I recently watched a film called Always Be My Maybe. And when I watched it, I remember thinking I would never be anyone's maybe. And now I realize I was wrong. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you why I am absolutely honoured to stand in today, Shad, and to be your maybe. So as Shad mentioned, he had invited a dear friend of ours, Paula Harriott, to introduce him and to be the discussant today. And as you also heard, Paula is a fearless activist and scholar and has served a prison sentence. And it's a bitter irony in a conference about reconciling our past and reimagining the future that more than 10 years after leaving prison and all of the great work she's done, the system still keeps her excluded and she wasn't permitted to travel to America. We are all diminished by systemic policies and practices that keep us apart, most especially evidenced in this precise moment by the fact you're stuck with me and not listening to Paula. And if she was here, I would be really happy for her to shut me up. And Shad would have known that Paula was likely to face these challenges when he asked her to be here on this stage. But one of the reasons I'm happy to be his maybe is that throughout his career, he has chosen to lean into topics, to people, to policies and places that aren't easy, with huge effort and a generosity of spirit that blows my mind. Shad chose to share this stage with a woman who spent time in prison because he knows we need to hear her voice. If we're going to seek justice, if we're going to reconcile with our past, if we're going to reimagine our future, we're going to have to learn to listen to some voices that we've systematically silenced. And as I skipped through the 49 pages of Shad's CV at 5 o'clock this morning, one thing jumped out at me. This man understands that in research it really matters who you ask, what you ask, and how you ask to the knowledge that you get, the knowledge that you produce, and the answers that you get. Because knowledge isn't neutral. It's loaded from the start by what we're curious about. And what we're curious about is limited by what we know. And what we know by who we know. Because we can't be curious about an unknown unknown. It doesn't occur to us. So curiosity is fed by closeness. And I think that might have been a problem for criminologies of the past. And Paula's absence today suggests it's still a problem for criminologies of the present. Although we research crime and its consequences, we don't want to get close to crime, either to the pain and trauma of being a victim of crime, or to the social exclusion imposed on those who have caused criminal harm and those close to them. So we stay distant, we lose closeness, we veer away from complexity, we lack curiosity, we don't ask relevant questions, and we miss matters that could shape knowledge and practice and could shape us in the way we inhabit this world and our scholarship. Our fears keep us distant, and our distance feeds our silence, and our silence makes us complicit. Because when you have the power to speak, when you have the opportunity to access knowledge that can give you a position of authority, so people might listen to your speaking, if we are silent, or worse, if we regurgitate the status quo, we risk becoming part of the problem. And I'm beyond grateful to all y'all, as they'd say in Texas, for the gift you gave us Brits in this brilliant scholar when you sent him overseas, because he's shaped so much of our criminal justice scholarship and practice. How many scholars could say their work has sparked a social movement? And of course, Shad would never say this of himself, but it's true. I smiled to myself this morning as I wrote down a list of nearly 40 different substantive topics from his publications and realised Shad might have earned the very dubious status of an academic trendsetter. I'm one of the many who are lucky enough to have had the privilege to write with him and have my scholarship shaped by the kind and thorough, hard-working wisdom of his. And I realised one of the reasons his areas of expertise and publication are so broad is because his affiliations span so many different constituencies of people involved in criminal justice. His first PhD student was formerly incarcerated. He's published with prison and probation staff, psychologists, people who have caused criminal harm, people who have suffered criminal harm, people in prison, even on death row, people who've been in prison, people who work in the systemic harms of our criminal justice system. Shad has studied how to shape public opinion and then worked in informed ways to do just that. He doesn't just publish in high-ranked academic journals for scholarly kudos and self-promotion. He's equally prolific in practitioner journals, community organisation pamphlets, parliamentary briefs, reports, think tank papers, newspaper articles and magazine, not to mention podcasts and the odd video, which is a tremendous self-sacrifice for the greater good when you're an incorrigible introvert. Recently, he collaborated in a participatory action research project with people in prison and post-release to explore the impact of COVID, a methodological minefield on every level, but a much-needed report. And despite his many accolades, he doesn't take himself too seriously. I genuinely don't think I've ever laughed out loud reading a CV before, but I loved his article on punitive attitudes, entitled with the question, "Is a conservative just a liberal who's been mugged?" His publications span disciplines drawing on psychology, social policy, anthropology, sociology, and a thorough, humble, and respectful grounding in the many diverse historical voices in criminology. And gently, oh, so respectfully gently, as you read his work, you feel that deeply political pulse that drives him, a pulse that resonates across his publications in English and French and Spanish and Russian and Japanese, to name just a few. But away from that public and scholarly Shad, I want to finish this introduction by sharing some more personal experiences that feel really relevant to this topic of how we, as criminology scholars, seek justice in the future. One of the accolades Shad and I both share is the dubious delight of being formerly of the University of Cambridge. 20 years ago, I was working in law reform in the government, and I bought myself a birthday present of Shad's first book, Making Good, and then I stalked Shad to be my supervisor at Cambridge. I was one of those students you will all know who sends that email that says, "I'm really interested in your work and I'd love to be a graduate student of yours." And Shad made time for me. I went up to Cambridge, we went out for lunch, and he looked at my proposal and he made helpful pointers. And later in my career at Cambridge as an academic, when you're stretched to the max receiving those kind of emails, his example has driven me to make time for people. And more recently, when I became a victim of a high-profile violent crime, and when I became a target of negative press because I choose to work and live my life with people who've been convicted of criminal offences, Shad didn't shrink away from me for fear of contamination, like many colleagues, but used his criminological knowledge and power to show solidarity through working with others to publish letters of support in national newspapers that spoke criminological truths to a public who might not otherwise get to hear them. In the presidential panel on mass incarceration on Thursday, the panel were asked about things that have been effective in moving towards positive reforms in criminal justice. And one of the panelists commented that often positive change can come from the moments of crisis. And because of my experiences of the last few years, it struck me that the seemingly indomitable partnership between the police and the popular press has an enviable expertise in capitalising on criminal justice crises to fuel the status quo. But the public is crying out for a counter-narrative, if only scholars might be brave enough to understand that we can simultaneously rely on evidence to shape criminal justice policy and sit with the pain of criminal harm. One need not obliterate or silence the other. And if in this conference we are commiserating 50 years of mass incarceration, Perhaps it's because there aren't too many scholars as lucky as me to have had my curiosity framed by a professor who models making time for the kinds of connection that stoke his brand of moral courage. A professor who's always stayed curious, who asks complex questions and provides robust and accessible answers, who substitutes methodological dogma and purism with mixed methods prowess, who doesn't shrink away from the trauma of crime, but leans into it with every excellent fibre of his brilliant being and mind, curious to explain, expose, empower others through his skills, who is brave enough to sit with the harms of crime, whether systemic or individual, rather than shrinking away and trying to hide them or fade them or even to fix them. I know Shad's dying now. We're nearly done, Shad. And as I've grappled with some of the existential criminological crises inherent in the theme of this conference, I've been reminded of a Mexican proverb written on a card made by students of mine in a high-security prison with a colleague of mine, Jack Merritt. It reads, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." Jack was later murdered by one of those students. The harm is real, and our work is vital. And I think perhaps in many ways this proverb holds a key to the way forwards. Throughout this conference, I've been delighted and amazed to hear tangible examples of Shad's work changing things. From Mary Covington of the non-profit Justice Forward, describing how they used Shad's work on reintegration rituals to train law enforcement officers how to interact with people in problem-solving courts, to an excellent first-time ASC presenter, Kiera Rose O'Connor, who presented on her master's thesis findings, which operationalized Shad's concept of belief in redeemability to assess its impact in employers' decisions to hire people with criminal convictions. There is an ego in wanting to see immediate results, to know and to claim the impact from our work. Perhaps if we focus more on planting the right seeds, on nourishing young scholars who are the soil in which those seeds grow, on ensuring diversity and representation across our departments, on getting close to people and issues that others veer away from, we might stand a chance of sowing hope into a future that reaps the rewards of our efforts. And that's why I got a ticket to this American Society of Criminology conference after 15 years of not being here, as soon as I heard that Shad was presiding, because I wouldn't have missed this lecture for the world. Never did I think I would have the honor of being your maybe, Shad, but what an honor it is. So without further ado, please lean in. Listen closely, get curious, and think deeply, because if you do, you won't leave here unchanged, and perhaps 50 years from now, we might have a foreign national, formerly incarcerated woman presiding, and she could then stand here and celebrate what has been born from the seeds we plant in the work we all go on to do after we head home tomorrow. So, on loan, because we want him back, please welcome the President of the American Society of Criminology, Shad Maruna.
The good news is there's only 30 minutes left. I'm setting my alarm. Wow. Great. There we are. So I'm going to give a talk about social movements today. If I don't get to it, there's a lot on that slide. So the point of the talk is that we need to focus less on individuals, more on collectives, more on movements in criminology. So appropriately, I've got a lot of thank yous I'd like to give out before I start on my thoughts. First of all, I want to thank Britt and all of the movement for basically saying everything that I wanted to say in this plenary. So that takes a lot of the pressure off me. I can now do whatever I'm about to do for the next 30 minutes, and you've really said it all for me. So thank you very much. I also want to thank my maybe, Ruth, for your kind words, for making the trip over from the UK. People in this room, Americans, may not know who Ruth is and what she's done with the you mentioned, you shouldn't have done Jack Merritt, but People in the UK know Ruth. People in prison in the UK know Ruth. People in prisons all over the world know what she's done, know what she's lived through, know what the Murdoch press has tried to do to her. And you know, there's not many people who are as strong, who have the strength, the wisdom, and the grace to be able to face that kind of pressure and then still stand up every day and do what Ruth does. And she gives me hope in a world that's not too good at the moment. So thank you very much, Ruth, as well. All right, I'm not going to thank you for that. Okay. Good. I also want to thank the ASC. I want to thank Chris Eskridge, who anyone who knows anything about the ASC should know that Chris has been the heart and soul of this organization for 4 decades. He's the one that keeps it running. We all know that, but only becoming president do I realize how much he gives of himself, his time, his energy, his love that he puts into this society, and it's been really something to work with him and see what that kind of selflessness really is and what it can do and what it's done for all of us. I also want to thank Sheena Case and the entire team at Columbus. They work incredibly hard in putting these conferences together. I want to thank my incredible executive board, Vice President Lisa Broidy, and future Vice President Natasha Frost, and all of the executive. They do a huge amount of work. I want to thank past presidents, Janet Laritzen, who can't be here today for tragic reasons, Catherine Russell Brown and Val Jennis, who I'm about to hand this to in a few minutes' time, who have been a tremendous team. The 4 of us really have been president. Although one person holds the title at any one time, we really do this as a collective. There are so many people involved in putting this meeting together. We really don't realize that, but this really is a joint effort. There is something like 40 committees that we put together painstakingly: the nominations committee, the Hindelang Award committee, the DEI committee. Each one has 6 or 7 members and a chair. We have the program committee, which is massive. We have area chairs, sub-area chairs. We have the divisions, and the divisions all do so much. Most of all, I want to thank my 2 program chairs, Jamie Fader, Jill McCorkle, who are really responsible. If you've had a good conference, if you've been impressed with anything new and exciting and vibey at this meeting, that's Jill and Jamie. They did all of that. I chose the 2 of them because they are my role models of sort of the criminologists that I'd want to be, and they have really come through with this and deserve all the credit for this meeting. Thank you. Okay. Lastly, I want to thank all of you, Criminology more generally, for putting up with me. As Ruth says, I'm a pretty weird guy, and you know, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and a lot of the things that I do aren't really what you do. And so I've worked in law schools, and law schools don't know what to make of me, and sociology departments, and they don't know what to make of me. And I come to criminology, and you guys are like, you know, hey, cool, make this guy president, which is the great thing about criminology. You're weird people, and you're not, you know, you're not rigid in the way we approach this. We all have a vision. I mean, look at us. It's 5 o'clock on Friday night. You've been going to talks since 8 a.m. every day for the last 3 days. Where are you? You know, you're here. We love this stuff, it's what makes us great. At the same point, I don't think it's unproblematic criminology. So I think we're learning, we're growing, and that's why we're here, and that's why we're talking this week. And so I'm going to challenge criminology a little bit in the talk, although it's getting shorter and shorter. But I challenge it from a place of love, and I mean that sincerely. So I'm going to start my talk with a brief anecdote. I'm going to end the anecdote at the end of the talk, so that's when you'll know when to applaud. But the anecdote's about these 2 fellas here. This was taken about 3 days before I left for Philadelphia. That's my friend Paul. He was in town for a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. We've known each other for about 30 years now. Paul has an amazing story. Oh, I'm supposed to use the clicker, aren't I? I'm not supposed to be doing that. Paul has an amazing story, such an interesting story. This was him in his last prison stay. That's him graduating from university. Paul's story is so interesting that I wrote a book about it. I wrote a book called Making Good, and Paul was one of the stories in that book. Paul's story broadly follows the narrative of the book. Some of you might have read the book, where he started with contaminated origins. We didn't have the word trauma or trauma-informed back in the 1990s when I was doing that work, but he had a lot of traumas in his life growing up in inner city Liverpool. He made some mistakes, but deep down was a good person. He found some opportunities, largely through the Narcotics Anonymous organization, found a community, found people who believed in him, found people that made him believe in himself. And as a result, he has become a leader. He's become an ambassador for change. Walking around that meeting with him was like walking around with a mini God. It was, the people showed such love for him wherever we went, and it was really tremendous, and it was a great honor for me to spend some time with him. So I'm going to steal his story in today's script and essentially take you through my own origins. I'm a contaminated or otherwise. I'm going to tell you how different criminology was in the 1990s when I first came to criminology. And I'm going to tell you some mistakes that I made along the way as a young criminologist, but that largely try to point out that my intentions were good and that what I was trying to do came from a good place. More recently, I've had the opportunity through meeting a lot of great people, some of whom you've already met, who have shown me the way, and I've changed and developed and grown, as all of us human beings, strangely, have the ability to do. And now I've become a kind of ambassador for this new change, and I'm going to try to recruit you into my new way of seeing the world. Hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. There'll be a big reveal about Paul. He'll come back at the end of the talk, and then I'm going to hand over this gavel, and we're all going to go to our receptions. But at first, I want to take you back to a bizarre and deeply dark and problematic time that we call the 1990s, and when Paul and I were young men. The 1990s hated young men, hated young people in general, and in a way that we, as a country, as a species perhaps, rarely does. There was a strange sense in the 1990s that young people couldn't change, that they were stuck in being who they were, and who they were was a deeply dangerous thing. This conference, one of the things we wanted to talk about, was the 50th anniversary of mass incarceration. Both Paul and I are also recently celebrated 50th anniversaries, and you will see we spent most of our youth in that curve at its most dramatic. The 1980s, the 1990s were unprecedented decades around the world in terms of punitiveness. And a lot of this punitiveness came from laws like the famous three strikes legislation that emerged in 1993 that essentially decided that once a person has shown themselves to be involved in patterns of behavior, that they are a write-off. They're no longer a person that could ever be redeemed or redeemable. We had a huge growth in the number of states with life without the possibility of parole release. We went from only about 7 states in the 70s to 32 states, and then suddenly nearly all 50 states have LWOP. And of course, the worst version of LWOP is the terrible acronym JLWOP, Juvenile Life Without Parole. The United States is one of only 4 countries around the world that can incarcerate a child, someone under 18 years old, for the rest of his or her life based on something they did when they were a child, and these jail WAPs flourished in the 1990s. Now, some of this, a great deal of it, had to do with race and racism in the United States, as everything has to do in the United States. In the great book, The Black Child Savers, Jeff Ward writes that a white supremacist ideology has always defined black youth as this strange species of rigid or inflexible human clay, a categorically incorrigible group more suited to neglect and exploitation than attempts at rehabilitation, normalization, and the like. And indeed, for much of U.S. history, that idea of incorrigibility was associated with race and racism. In a fabulous article, Dieter writes, while the notion of incorrigible criminality is not reducible to racism, neither is it separate from racist ideas. This is, I think, a very fair characterization. It doesn't explain why these ideas came to the fore so much in the 1990s, but it's certainly right. More was going on in the 1990s, and you could see this in the scholarship that was in the air. The most notorious, of course, is this idea of the juvenile super predator that made such a huge impact on public policy, both Democrats and Republicans in the 1990s. You know this story. You know there were these wild predictions of this coming wave of juvenile super predators, that there'd be 270,000 more super predators on the streets by the year 2010. You know, of course, that not only did this wave not emerge, but it was the absolute opposite. We saw the biggest drop in all of our living history in terms of juvenile young people, let's call them human beings, criminal involvement in that time. Yet, why was there this fascination with the super predator? There was another thing invented in the 1990s in academia, this one out of Canadian psychology. There had been the idea of the psychopath. It had been an idea that was on the margins of psychology for 100 years, very much the margins, not at all a mainstream idea. In the 1990s, suddenly this bizarre idea came to the fore through a new measure called the PCLR. The concept of psychopathy came to take over forensic psychology in lots of ways. It started to dominate prisons, it dominates the courts, it dominates many other real-life impact of this thing. And this psychopath sounds very much like the super predator. These are people who are completely lacking in conscience or feelings for others. They selfishly take what they want and do as they please. And the most famous book on this was called Without Conscience, of the psychopath. Strangely, this was a measure, a clinical measure that was not to help change people, but it was to designate what people were incapable of change. So it was a kind of incorrigibility measure. It says that if you're high on psychopathy, don't give these people any treatment, lock them up, throw away the key, and that's a bizarre use of our psychological testing. Of course, there turns out there was no evidence for this. The PCLR isn't even sensitive to change as a measure. And when we look at samples of people who are high on so-called psychopathy, they turn out to change in treatment just like any other population. There's two great books on this I would recommend. The first tells the history of this story called The Myth of the Born Criminal, and a new book that's just going to be out here in the next couple of months called Psychopathy Unmasked, The Rise and Fall of a Dangerous Diagnosis, that basically, from an incredibly methodical perspective, takes apart every one of the kind of myths that you saw in the previous slides of the lacking of conscience or the inability to change and all these things. It turns out that psychopaths change just like all the rest of us as they mature. In criminology, we're not, completely out of this. Maybe the most famous paper, one of the best papers and best known papers that came out of criminology in that exact same era in 1993 was, certainly not junk science, incredibly good science, strong science. I still recommend, I require, it doesn't mean that it always happens, but I require this reading for my students every semester because Terry Moffat's incredible paper has in it one of the earliest, strongest theories of desistance. Of course, we all know the adolescent limited and the life course persistent. The adolescent limited group in her sample were the largest group. It's a theory that was meant to explain why the vast majority of the people that we call offenders or whatever label we want to give to them are going to change. But of course, the part of the theory that got everyone's attention and that has lasted the test of time is her theory about the life course persistence of some individuals. And here, the story was much more bleak, much more depressing. These were individuals who weren't going to be able to change. Again, another version of this incorrigible theory. And I bring all this up to say this is where I entered the scene. This is where we came in as desistance theorists. This is our origins. And of course, the main contribution of desistance theory to this day is the argument that Sampson and Laub made in our ASC journal that it turns out that crime declines with age sooner or later for every individual. I'm going to not use their words again. This is an older article. Whether identified prospectively according to risk factors or retrospectively, they conclude that desistance processes are at work even among active individuals, even among those who our theory would predict are going to be life course persistent. Everybody changes eventually. And that's really been the main contribution of 20 years of desistance theory. We've got a film about it now that we recommend. But there's dozens and dozens of books that have been spurred by that original desistance impulse. And I recommend any one of these far more than my own research from 20 odd years ago for those who are interested in this desistance idea. My research, as I've mentioned already, looked at stories. Why, you might ask, in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of what some have called a genocide of mass incarceration that had so much impact on individuals' lives, on the families of the people we're incarcerating, but on wider communities. The impact of mass incarceration on American society writ large is still a story that needs to be told, and few have told it better than Todd Clear in his book on imprisoning communities. Why would anybody focus on stories in this case? I argue still that stories are important. Stories are crucial to our understanding of the world and our understanding of ourselves. As Donald Polkinghorne has written, narratives or stories are the primary form by which human experience is made meaningful. And Britt pointed out, it's often those stories that we forget in criminology in our rush for theories and data and so forth, that these individual stories matter because stories play an oversized role in human lives and learning. And these stories have had positive impact. I mentioned J.L. Wapp earlier and the impact of those sentences. You will know that the Supreme Court's Miller decision has reversed or has opened up a window of hope for those people that were sentenced to life without parole as juveniles, and it's created this generation of what are called Miller's children who have these Miller hearings where they're able to basically make a case for themselves as not incorrigible, make the case that they are human beings organically, developmentally, and that they have matured and they're no longer the person they were when they committed those crimes. Unfortunately, Miller himself has not been successful in getting out of prison, but many others have, and there's actually some at this conference, I'm delighted to say. One of the Pennsylvania's very first Miller's children, after doing 40 years, has come out and he joined us at the ASC. Yes, indeed. And I've been involved in some of these cases. I was very happy to give testimony in Federico Cruz's case, and using the narrative, the narrative desistance research, and Federico was also given a new sentence and has the possibility now that he didn't have 6 months ago, that one day he too might be able to come out of prison. And there's phenomenal desistance-based research on this by Laura Abrams, who I hope is here, and research in the UK on how people change inside and outside prison. Ben Cruz, fantastic research looking at young people longitudinally suffering life imprisonment as well. Desistance has also had a big impact on practice. As many in the UK will know, this man, Fergus McNeil, who's here, has been responsible for a great deal of that, moving away from the approach of giving everyone a label, who's a psychopath, who's not a psychopath, and recognizing their story, that everyone has a story, and treating people as human beings in that sense. We've also seen, oh, sorry, that slide didn't work, but we've also seen real impact in terms of practices. Did we make any mistakes along the way? We made a lot of mistakes, and fortunately we don't have much time for me to go into all the things that I wish I didn't do, and that's normal for a desistance narrative. We focused too much on individuals. We focused too much on this ridiculous binary between agency and structure. The desistance narrative got too easily confused with a responsibilizing, oh, people just need to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps narrative, maybe too easily co-opted by those with the rehabilitationist agenda. My great fear is that desistance has become a word like rehabilitation. If you remember Red in the Shawshank Redemption, where he says, you know, rehabilitation, that's your word. We don't use words like that. That's a jargon word. It doesn't mean it. Anyway, it's a much better speech than that version. But desistance, I think, at times has become that jargon word for people in prison and people out of prison, and I hate that. And most of all, this question of whose story is it anyway? But enough of the bad things. You know, some of the best things that have come out of desistance research, I really think we have contributed to this idea that Britt mentioned earlier of experts by experience. This is an idea that's been around for a long time. Again, in other fields, addiction recovery, the idea that the person best placed to help another addict has always been a fellow addict. But in criminal justice or the criminal legal system, that idea is much slower to have taken shape. And I think the desistance research did a lot inspiring this gathering movement around credible messengers or experts by experience or lived experience. We see a great deal of references to desistance research in this field. We know that when you talk to people who have changed, who have made good, who've turned their lives around, they will always say that the best guidance they received was from other people. Other people's stories have helped them turn their. One of them asked me once, how do you get through a minefield? He says, that's easy. You watch the person in front of you. If they get through alive, you follow in their footsteps. And that's how desistance works. It's like a minefield. You need someone, a wounded healer or a guide to get you through that process. And our agencies in the UK are starting to recognize that. Probation is hiring more and more people with convictions because they know the power of the wounded healers. These are two wounded healers. Another anecdote, I like anecdotes. That's Alex Rose in the middle, and then on the end is a guy called Gethin Jones. And it was at this meeting that somebody took that picture. I think Gethin took the picture. It was at that meeting that the three of us were talking, and Gethin told the story. Gethin has an absolutely amazing story. You need to hear him tell it. He's a professional storyteller, so he tells it much better than I would be able to in my 10 seconds here. But Gethin overcame obstacles like you wouldn't believe, basically. He was a child of a teenage mother who herself was an orphan. He was orphaned at a very early age. He was incarcerated, and rather than getting helped by the state decided to incarcerate him for the first time at age 14, and he became a state-raised youth through prison sentence after prison sentence, and then turned himself around in a remarkable way. He has started something called Unlocking Potential, where he's become a motivational speaker, goes around to prisons all over the world and gives his story. Anyhow, one of the times he gave his story, someone came up to him and he said, you've given me so much, you've turned my life around. Do you know what the word hope means? Do you know what the word hope stands for? And Gethin, who is basically in the hope business, had no idea what he was talking about. What do you mean hope stands for? And he says, hope stands for hearing other people's experiences. And this is a wonderful, wonderful metaphor. I don't know the person's name who came up with that. He was a life prisoner that Gethin was working with. But hearing other people's experiences is the definition of hope. So, where am I? Desistance is not... so where are we now? Great, this is good timing. We are at Desistance 2.0, I would like to think. And Desistance 2.0 is the idea of desistance not as an individual journey, as an important one that is, but as a collective one. Basically, we have moved from primary desistance to secondary. We're now talking about tertiary desistance. And the idea here is that desistance can only be successful, and not just if the individual changes, but also if society changes and changes the way it recognizes the person. All the things that Britt was talking about in her talk about recognizing returning citizens as citizens and restoring their rights and equality as citizens. And that only happens if there's change at the macro level. And that macro level change is coming as a result of the sort of social movement that Britt talked about. So how do you create a social movement? Well, it helps when you incarcerate millions of people, as the United States has done. By incarcerating so many people, we have created this army, and maybe the right word, maybe the wrong word, but we've created a movement of people with convictions, and the new technology has made those convictions easier to access than ever before, and that has created the potential. It hasn't lit the fuse, but it has created the right context in order for the huge change we're seeing in terms of social organizing and activism, both inside prison, where we've seen some of the huge prison strikes across the United States in recent years, but especially among former prisoners. And I put up my colleague, Tom LaBelle, who can't be here today, who's been banging this drum long before I have, who's been a major turning point in my own thinking around this. And Tom has been, as he always is, ahead of the curve in thinking about these things, as a number of others in criminology have as well. We see now credible messengers, wounded healers, experts by experience, taking the lead on community-based crime prevention. The violence interrupters are the most obvious example of ways that former prisoners are now leading at creating peace in our communities where it's badly needed. I've had the great opportunity of working here in Philadelphia with the Cure Violence here in Philly, and oh, that's my alarm. Yeah, we're good, okay. Only about 80 slides to go. This is not a problem. I don't know why it's not letting me turn that off though. Great. We also had with us earlier in the conference William Outlaw, who is the main character in the book Citizen Outlaw, and his colleagues from New Haven, and they're work that they've done. Ex-prisoners are also leading the way in restorative justice around the world. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I live, all the restorative justice work, which is world leading, has been started by former political prisoners on either the Republican or the Loyalist sides, and some of my colleagues have looked at that. And all of this work is driven by a phrase where I'm not sure if Britt mentioned it or not, this idea of nothing about us without us. And that says that our efforts to change the world, as all of us in this room hopefully want to do, need to be not just done on behalf of those who have the lived experience, but done with and alongside those individuals. So this the idea that we're seeing this social movement emerging for epistemic justice, as much as traditional social movements have emerged for economic justice or for recognition and the like. Here we've got a social movement emerging around this issue of voice and who speaks for ex-prisoners, and what Michelle Moody Adams calls narrative activism, which is resisting oppressive narrative framings and replacing them with new liberating narrative framings that allow for the voices of lived experience. Oh, and that got a little moved around, but we also made an effort in this conference to recognize W.E.B. Du Bois and all that he's done for criminology. And Du Bois as well was one of the early thinkers, and that's Alton Morris. And all right. I'm going to get that off. I think, if I can figure out what I've done with it. Cancel. Great. Du Bois was one of the earliest thinkers who talked about this notion of lived experience and the need to be led by those who have that lived experience. And we see this in the emerging world around criminal justice activists or criminal legal system activists like JL USA in New York. On their website, they say, we use our narratives to discuss the system, telling the truth about race and class discrimination in a way that helps people see reality. People respond to anecdotes. You may forget the data, but you don't forget our stories. Likewise, in California, All of Us or None have said, look, the advocates have spoken for us, but now it's our time to speak for ourselves. We have the ability to be more than helpless victims. It's our responsibility to stand up and fight this. And you see this voice coming through in new media opportunities like Ruth was talking about, a huge number of podcasts. We had a wonderful film made by an ex-prisoner here in Philadelphia, if he's here. Just yesterday, and I beg you to Google that and get in touch with Shuja and the Pardons group. Okay, that one wasn't me. And all this is to say, and yeah, we're in our final throes, that look who's back. We're back to stories and storytelling. As ridiculous as it might have sounded 30 years ago, I'm making the case still, I haven't changed, that the narratives are still really crucial to this work, that if we want to understand how we're going to change the world, tertiary decisions, changing not just individuals, but changing the way the world sees individuals, we're going to need storytelling. We're going to have to understand the power of narrative, because it turns out guys like Marshall Gans, who knows a thing or two about social movements, worked with Cesar Chavez, Mississippi Freedom Summer, Students Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and so forth, argue that storytelling is at the very core of social movements, that no social movement is successful without storytelling. Gary Allen Fine, the sociologist, says, if you think about social movements you're a part of, you probably joined because of some narrative that you heard. Stories command our attention in ways that our statistics and our research never can. And maybe particularly redemption stories. As Kakatani says, there's no narrative more potent today or throughout American history than the one about redemption. And we have shown this in some of our research. It was mentioned earlier with Anna King. We've seen this replicated more recently by Leah Butler and her colleagues, that redemption is a story that works in American culture. So what does all this mean? And I'm well past time, but I wanted to leave you with a message. As I said, I would become an advocate for change, and this isn't a message that's going to surprise anyone. It means we have to listen to convict criminology first and foremost. Convict Criminology is celebrating their 25th anniversary at this conference. As Jennifer Ortiz says, we're not going to be ignored anymore. We are here and we're not going anywhere. That's in the brand new issue of the Journal of Prisoners on Prisons, which has been going for how many? What are we on now? Thank you. Yeah, a long time, and longer than a lot of us have been talking about lived experience. The Journal of Prisoners on Prison has recognized who the experts are on that subject. And this has gotten messed around anyway. I didn't mean to cover up people's faces. We now have a division of convict criminology within the ASC. We've got a new generation of desistance researchers doing desistance narratives and coming from a lived experience point of view, coming from a critical race theory perspective. We've got criminology classes moving into prisons. We just had the wonderful 25th anniversary of the Inside Out prison exchange program here in Philadelphia this week. We also in the UK, thanks to this woman largely, Ruth Armstrong, have had our own experiences with learning together, which bringing students out of the classrooms into prisons to learn together alongside students from inside the institutions. It also means challenging the way we traditionally do academic research. This is Paula, who couldn't be here, and Paula is a big a champion of making us think differently about doing the research, that we aren't anthropologists going into strange lands. We need to get out of that kind of colonial mindset and start to work with and alongside those that we're doing research with. That idea of nothing about us without us starts with our research, and trying to do more participatory research. Ruth mentioned that I've started doing work with the User Voice organization. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had so much I was going to talk about. Where we were during the COVID epidemic, we needed to get some sense of what was happening inside the prisons in the UK. And the only way we could do that was to train people who are already in the prisons to become their own research team and go themselves into do the interviews, do the ethnography, do the surveying of their fellow prisoners. We ended up training 99 peer researchers across 11 prisons in the UK, and they ended up surveying something like 1,800 other fellow prisoners, and truly remarkable change in terms of mental health and other things happening during that period, and that was all a participatory action research. This has been an idea that's been around a long time. Foucault, of course, never did any prisons research himself, but was very much guided by his team of former prisoners and others in the Prison Information Group. Hans Talk has written about using his very dated language now, 50 years ago, convict as researcher, and talking about allowing those who are inside prison to tell us the story of what was going on. That was nearly 50 years ago, and as always, Hans had it exactly right. I'm going to end, however, because I'm way past time, with my friend Paul and the story that I said I was going to finish that I started at the beginning, and then I'm going to hand over this gavel. One thing I didn't tell you about Paul, he, at the time of my interviews, remember the Liverpool study was done in the mid-90s. Paul was not in the desisting group at the time. He was in my comparison group of those who are persisting with crime. And he did indeed persist with crime. Those are his prison IDs. His last prison stint ended in 2014. He has been clean for over a decade, as he was celebrating at the Narcotics Anonymous meeting. He graduated from university in 2018 with a social sciences degree. He then went on to get a master's degree. in 2019 in criminology, and for his PhD, which he's currently involved in, Paul is doing a desistance study in Liverpool some 25 years later, and so he has moved from, quite literally, not metaphorically, from the subject of a Liverpool desistance study to the author of a Liverpool desistance study. And I see his journey in many ways as my journey, as I can sort of end my career now once he finishes that PhD. It's going to be everything that I would want to have achieved in mine. So I guess the moral of this particular story, and I apologize for always talking too fast and being too disorganized, but the moral of my story today is that if I were going to do the Liverpool desistance study again, and let's face it, on those 49 pages, basically everything I've done has been a reworking over and over, a second draft, a third draft, a 49th draft of that same work. So if I were to do it again, I believe that if I could go back in time, I would have brought Paul and the other participants in from the start. I wouldn't have just written a book about them. I would have written the book with them, and it would have been a much better book. It still might be. Just give us some time. Thanks very much. And now, I have the moment I've been waiting for the last 40 minutes for sure, but much longer than that. I have the very wonderful opportunity to hand over this gavel to the next ASC president. Before I say her name, because if I say her name, you're going to applaud, I want to tell you a little bit about what it's been like working with Val now for the last 12 months. The way the ASC works, and nobody would know this, is when you come on as president, you become a president-elect for the year, and that means you sort of shadow the president. And then next year, I will move to the past president, and then stick around to help out as a kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi mentor sort of situation while she becomes the president. It hasn't worked that way in my year at all. Certainly, when I was the president-elect, I learned a great deal from Janet Luritzen. But with Val, she knows so much. She's so good. She's so such a natural at this position. I've been the mentee, and she's been teaching me each step of the way. So you're going to be in really, really good hands next year. Things are going to run so smoothly you won't believe it, and I'm just really delighted to have had the chance to work with her. Val, here you go. That was wonderful. Thank you. We got a picture.
Oh, let's do it after I do a few comments. Thank you. And the good news is I only brought up one page of notes. I have timed this. We will have you.
I've got more if you want some.
No, I don't, actually. First of all, let me just say thank you to both Britt and Ruth, both of whom offered, for me, and I'm sure for many of you, really inspiration tonight. I want to thank you for that gift, both of you. And I just have a few moments to say something about Shad, and it seems like the obvious thing to do is to tell a story of the lived experience.
There you go.
And it's not a desistance story, it's a oh wow story. It's about if only we could get more of this, not less of it. And I want to say Shad, I of course have known Shad's scholarship and his reputation. Not all of what you said, Ruth, but some portion of that. I just read, I don't hang out. And of course, have a sense, you feel like you know people when you read about them and you see those pictures when they have long hair, short hair, gray hair, all of that stuff, no hair. I want to tell you the story of the last year of working with Shad. And I'm going to keep it very quick. I was told 3 parts is always good. First of all, Shad demonstrated routinely on email, on phone calls, in meetings, however I wanted to engage with him, something I value immensely, and I haven't told Shad this, which is I observed without fail that Shad took the job of being the president of the American Society of Criminology seriously. He took the work seriously, understanding that it's on behalf of all of us and that it was a leadership position that had consequences. And Shad, I saw you take that seriously without taking yourself too seriously. Ruth, I see that too. At the same time, I saw Shad's kindness. And you know, kindness is underrated these days. Kindness will take you a long, long way. And I was not, I'd heard stories about Shad, and he's a nice guy, you know, that frame. But I saw routine acts of kindness that I find admirable, I find rare, and you just want to get close to it. Now, at a conference like this, you don't want to hug it. We have policies against that. But I did want to hug you a number of times. And of course, you won't be surprised, this is my third part, just raw intelligence and creativity. And it's raw and it's palpable. And when you watch it emerge in one-on-ones and group meetings over emails, you know immediately we're all better off because of Shad's intelligence, creativity, kindness, and taking it as a serious matter that he lead this organization this year. I want to thank you, Shad, for all of that and letting me see that story about you. I also want to say Shad leaves us with some legacies. So, of course, Shad will publish his presidential address, and that will be part of his legacy. There are two things that I, Val Genis, am particularly appreciative of. Particularly. They speak to my politics, they speak to what matters to me and why, and I think we are better off because under Shad's leadership, we did two things this year. We actually enacted a child support policy and practice in the American Society of Criminology in the year 2023. Thank you, Shad. It was a long time coming. We should have done it sooner, and I appreciate your leadership on that. We also, you will be hearing more about this. We are now prepared to roll out a DEI statement that I think many of you will read and appreciate, and we will do our best to continue to align our practices and our commitments with the very articulations in that statement. And Shad led us through that process with a consultant, and this organization will be better off as a result. Thank you, Shad. Okay. Most importantly, and here's a lead in to who your new leader is. There's nothing I love more than a good stand-up comic who sees the truths. Nothing. I've always said they're the best observers, they're the edgiest people, they're the ones that make us uncomfortable. By the way, Rolling Stone magazine did a very sophisticated analysis to let us all know who was the #1 stand-up of all time. Guess who it was? This had to do with, you know, the magnitude of your impact, your legacy, the way you rattled the cage, the truths you told. It was Richard Pryor. I think Phyllis Diller was the #1 woman. Anyway, I have never seen an ASC president stand up and purposefully and creatively and kindly be funny during an awards ceremony. And that is going to be your legacy too. I thought that was hilarious. It's innovative. It makes it enjoyable. Lest you think I'm just kind of embellishing, there is one thing I do not appreciate about Shad, and I never want to see it again. Never. And I would like your support on this. I never want to see this man scoop ice cream again. Ever. Thank you, Shad. Thanks so much. Let me close by inviting you all to join us in San Francisco, the city by the bay, in 2024. And before you do that, go to some of the receptions tonight, relax, enjoy yourself, network, and tell some stories about the lived experience. Thank you, everybody.